And we'll talk about a blog I wrote called "Why Did He Chew Off His Tail and Break His Teeth?" Several people asked me to talk about that in terms of obsessive compulsive behaviors and drive, and what is drive, and anxiety, and the relationship between drive and anxiety. Thank you, Grace. What does this all mean? And is it required? Do high drive dogs have to have these behaviors? And what are the downsides and the risks? And so I set up a list of things I wanted to talk about. And one is obsessive compulsive behavior versus obsessive compulsive disorder. And what else did I want? Drives. What do I mean by drive? And what do other people tend to mean when they say drive? Breeding for drive versus breeding for anxiety and temperament. I think we inadvertently breed for anxiety sometimes because we don't always know things that I think we're getting better, and I think we're getting more sophisticated, but it's worth talking about it, especially if you're a breeder. You really want to be thinking about what you're breeding for, especially if you're the kind of person who puts up advertisements saying extreme, right? So whenever I see extreme ball drive, extreme prey drive, I start to get a little nervous about what you mean by extreme. So make sure you know what you mean, and that extreme is a positive quality and not a my dog can't stop, therefore they are extreme. Movement versus stillness in relation to drive. There's a real misunderstanding about drive and movement. Just in a nutshell, drive is not movement. A dog can be in exceptionally high drive state and not be moving at all. Drive is really about what the dog should be doing at that moment. So if you think high drive means the dog moves a lot, then you're a little confused, but there is a relationship between drive and movement, so we could talk about that. Real working dogs versus working sports. I think this is as close as I really want to get to ethics, because I don't want to talk about ethics right now on a Facebook Live. I think there's a lot to that. But it probably is worth talking about why we breed dogs to have behaviors that are probably not in their best interest. And I think to do that intelligently, we need to address the fact that a working dog is a little bit different than a sport dog. And I want to talk about response to pressure and punishment in terms of how a dog responds. Some dogs stress up, some dogs stress down, and how that is different in a working dog population than it is in a pet population. And that should cover it. That's a lot of territory. Now, having given you a little warm up and a hello, I should also say that this is just a free Facebook Live. I decided to do it about 30 minutes ago. So you get what you get. And what that means is I have 3 dogs in the house. And it's perfectly likely that my squirrels, because I have squirrels too in the backyard, are going to start. They're not pet squirrels. I don't have a choice about them. But there are squirrels here. If they start to run around, then the dogs will start to run around. You know what? What can I say? You'll get 20 seconds of dogs barking. I'll stop for that. I have human children. I have a husband, and they walk around and they do things too. They will do those things. And I think I have people coming to my house. Some kids are going to do something in my backyard with power tools. And I can't remember if that's 10 o'clock or 10:30. If that happens, there will be a little excitement for a period of time while that gets settled. I'm hoping it's 10:30 though. So just be aware of that. If I was charging you for this via a webinar, there would be no dogs in the house. There would be no squirrels running. Oh, and there goes a squirrel. And there would be no children running around. So, you know, just keep in mind those things. So that's Burrito. Let's see if they're going to stop on their own. Maybe. If I have to, I'll deal with them. All right. Obsessive compulsive disorder versus obsessive compulsive tendencies versus obsessive compulsive behavior. Obsessive compulsive disorder is a bad thing. It is always a bad thing. It is a bad thing in people. It is a bad thing in dogs. It basically means that the dog's behavior is not in their best interest, in the sense that a logical, rational person could look at it and say that is functional behavior. It is in the sense that all behavior has a reason. So somewhere in that dog's biology, obsessive compulsive behavior serves a purpose for that dog. So you have a person who washes their hands. That's the example I used in the blog of a human being who has obsessive compulsive disorder. And they wash their hands 50 times a day, and they're a bloody mess, and it's miserable, and it hurts, and they hate it. They hate everything about what they do and how they do it, but they cannot stop, because the act of washing, the compulsive part, relieves something for them. It's a mental thing, right? And it's a chemical thing, and they don't have a choice. But any logical, rational person could look at that and say, that is not functional behavior. And it's not. But they're going to do it anyway because it solves something inside of them, because they have something a little wrong with the wiring or with the chemicals or something I don't even know about. Dogs have this too. And when you have that, you need medication and you need professional help, because it's not a matter of just a little tweak. It's going to come right back. It's going to be a problem. So when I talk about obsessive compulsive behaviors, I'm not talking about obsessive compulsive disorder necessarily. Obsessive compulsive behaviors, the way I talk about it in relation to high drive dogs, is dogs that appear highly obsessive over certain things, but one hopes that under certain conditions they can stop and show more functional behavior. So a dog that will play ball for an hour until it drops of heat stroke, is that a disorder or is that a behavior? I don't know. Where do you pull the line? So the dogs I have, I would say historically in the last 10 to 20 years, the dogs I've had that are working bred, working line, would absolutely play ball to the point of heat stroke. And so I have to be responsible for them. I can't allow that to happen. Having said that, when I put the ball away and come in the house, my dogs do not do things that would suggest to me that they were struggling or suffering because they weren't able to play ball at that moment. So when I say we're done and we go in, they are done. They're able to stop and they're able to go about their lives in a normal fashion. It does not cause them to come in the house and show other weird behaviors because they've been asked to stop playing ball. However, having said that, there are dogs out there absolutely positively that do not have that reaction. And when you play ball with them, rather than coming in the house and being happy and tired, they begin to stress up and act bizarre, and they are struggling for the fact that they've been asked to stop. That's maladaptive. That's a problem for us, right? So where's the line? Well, I can't really answer that question, but it's something you really want to think about, because why do we want dogs that would play ball to the point of dropping of heat stroke? Well, we want it because if it's a working dog, a real working dog, or even a sport dog, if you want to look at it like that, you need dogs that will stay in the game even when it's kind of not fun anymore. So a herding dog who's rounding up sheep, it's raining, the dog still needs to do that job. A police dog who's sent after a bad guy, the person tries to hit the dog hard, not for fun, and kick the dog. You need a dog who will stay in the game. You're a hunter, you've shot a duck, the duck fell in the water is cold. You need a dog who will go get the duck. That is the dog's job. And if the dog does not have a very strong attraction to the behavior, a herding dog really wants those sheep. And if they don't, and they opt out when it becomes a little inconvenient, you don't have much of a working dog. And the relationship between sport dogs for work, a sporting dog might be an IPO dog versus a police or military dog. But those are very related. And if you look at the pedigrees, you will find a huge amount of overlap between sport dogs and working long dogs. A working sheepdog, same thing. A sport dog does the same thing, a herding dog, as they would do if they were a real herding dog on a ranch. Again, you're going to find a lot of overlap in the pedigrees and the breeding. Certain things would be different. Certain behaviors people would breed for slightly differently in a sport dog than a working dog. And same thing with really all of the working drives. So one of the big differences between dogs that are bred for sport and dogs that are not is their persistence under adversity, right? So the reason when I was breeding dogs, the reason I worked with working line Belgians rather than show line Belgians is because I've done both. I have what's an IPO3 on a show line Belgian, and all I can tell you is I'll never do it again. I don't want to work that hard. It took a lot because he wouldn't persist with the game aspect when the adversity became greater than he was comfortable with, whereas my working line dogs work extremely hard to stay in the game because their breeding makes them do that. And partly that's because they have obsessive behavior. So when I show them a person with a sleeve, and this is a game for them, but it's an important game for them, and they see that there's an opportunity to play tug, they are not inclined to walk away from that opportunity. Is that good or bad? Well, let's go a little deeper. Let's talk about the fact that a lot of working dogs go to people who are not dog trainers. And this is true across the board. Just because a farmer's a farmer with sheep doesn't mean he wants to be a dog trainer. He wants a dog that does the job. If a person really loves hunting and they get a dog to help them, they may or may not be a dog trainer. They may get a dog to do a job. In my area, when the police department is looking for a handler, people apply for that job. You don't have to be a dog trainer. As a matter of fact, odds are very good you are not a dog trainer. You may not even like dogs. They have a process, again, in my area, this may vary, where you apply, you get paid a little bit more, so it's kind of attractive, and then you get a dog partner. And you may know nothing about dog training, and now here you have this high-performance animal who's hopefully well-trained, and you have to do something with it. And that means that unlike somebody like me who might have many, 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 many years of training and experience with these dogs, that person probably does not. And somehow that dog is going to have to function and manage with this person. And so to some extent, we breed dogs that make up for poor handling in the working arena. Unlike performance, where, if you want the dog to go over the teeter-totter and you don't know how to teach it, the dog is probably not going to figure that out for you. Working dogs will work incredibly hard to figure things out for you. And then that brings us to a discussion of drive. What do we mean by drive? I am not referring to a science word when I say drive. There is one, drive reduction theory, but that is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about the common knowledge usage of the word. So when I say, wow, that guy's really driven, I don't have to define that for you. We can all understand what that means. That person is driven, that woman is driven, that child is driven. People understand that means an innate quality of the person or dog to stay in the game and reach something, some goal that is out there. They will persist. They have resilience. If something knocks them down from their path, they get back up and they try again. They tend to maintain a positive and cheerful attitude towards the thing, right? That's a driven person. It is no more complicated than that, and I'm not about to toss the word because it wasn't created by a scientist. If you want my opinion, scientists have not done a very good job of creating words that help people understand. So I'm going to stick with the common usage word, drive. If I say a dog is driven, just mentally say, what would I be saying if that was a human being? And you'll get there. So what do we want with that police officer who knows nothing about dogs and somebody just handed them their leash and said, this is your new partner? You want a dog who is resilient, because that person may not have a clue about how to train or how to do anything. The dog needs to stay in the game. You want a dog who has a good attitude about it. You want a dog who persists and eventually drags the handler along, right? So it's really the dog pulling the handler, not the reverse. Dogs that require exceptionally good handling are not going to be the most successful working dogs. They may be very good sport dogs because a sport population is a different population. And so handlers within the sport population can take dogs that are more edgy and bizarre and maybe have more actually pushing harder into the obsessive compulsive in the disordered word. And that's when we get into people talking about extreme. My dog has extreme this, extreme that. And then those dogs are often very temperamental. And what do we mean by temperamental? Well, you better do it right. Now you have a Ferrari, and if you do your Ferrari wrong, you don't go, right? So whereas if you have a Chevy, the thing keeps going. So a working dog is probably going to be better off as a Chevy, but when you're trying to get super high points and you care not only that your dog get the duck, but that he go fast in a straight line and hand it to you without moving, that's a whole nother matter. Now we're looking for dogs that go beyond just good, solid drives and stability. But that gets us into a whole nother set of things, which is where people, maybe more novice trainers or breeders, or maybe people who aren't novice but are, let's call it superstitious learning. They've had dogs in the past that they did things. They did terrible training. I have seen the worst training in the working world, way worse than anywhere else, because the dogs make up for you. And unfortunately, so you go, oh, look at this. This is amazing. If I hit him really hard right over his shoulder blades, right before I say fetch, he does it every time. Well, he was going to do it anyway. But the person got it in their head that somehow they caused that behavior, because human beings like to take positive responsibility for things that go well. So when it goes well, we say, oh, this caused that, cause and effect. And often it didn't cause it at all. I often say dogs often learn in spite of us, not because of us. And I guarantee you that is way more prevalent in the working world. And that is why the working sports in the average levels, I'm not talking about the high end. The high end is very sophisticated, but the average working dog trainer is at a lower level of understanding and capacity than an average level performance or performance trainer, because generally performance dogs are not bred to be quite so high on the scale, and they don't have the drive, and they're not so resilient. So if you hit them over the shoulder blades, they leave, they don't fetch, right? So it's harder to make inadvertent conclusions about how your behavior caused the dog's behavior. I can tell you, I have seen people training working dogs, and I had absolutely no idea how the dog figured out what the owner wanted. I knew because I'm a dog trainer, and I could look and say, oh, they're trying to teach the dog a down out of motion, but what they're doing isn't going to get them there. And you know what? The next week I come back and indeed the dog is doing it. So somehow the dog figured out what I could not. That speaks very well of the dog, very poorly of the handler, but it doesn't change the fact that people take responsibility for changes in dogs' behavior. High drive dogs with a lot of resilience will stay in the game in spite of very poor decision making. And that is a lot of why we continue to breed them, because it works. And when it doesn't work, we wash the dog out. So the washout rate in the workout sports is higher than in the performance world, largely because of there's a lot of bad training. So dogs get washed out who shouldn't, because they're not being handled properly and the dog did not have enough resilience to put up with it. All right, breeding for drive versus breeding for anxiety and movement. There is this thing in people's head when dogs move that's drive. And the reason we think that is because most working sports do require dogs that move. I mean, there aren't that many sports that involve not moving, right? Sit, stay. But think about this. You have a herding dog, a border collie, and it's out all day long, 12, 14 hours. It's not functional to move for 14 hours. It's also not necessary. So the dog just lays there and stares at the sheep. The dog is doing that 100% in drive, because drive is doing the appropriate thing at the right time. So if the sheep aren't moving, there's no reason for the dog to move. Is the dog in drive? Absolutely. But he's not moving because there's no reason to move. If one sheep moves, that dog will respond. How will it respond? Maybe with movement, maybe just by shifting its body, maybe by shifting its gaze. Does it solve the problem? If it does, the dog goes back to doing nothing and staring. If nothing else, the border collie is sure that it's a good thing it watched the whole time, right? Because see, I saw that. Now I'll wait another hour. Movement is not drive. It never has been drive. It's just that when we need it, it needs to be there. So that border collie needs to go from 0 to 20 miles an hour instantly and then stop when it's no longer appropriate to keep moving. An IPO dog. IPO, for those who don't know, it's a protection sport. Or a police dog. I see so many police dogs driving down the street, barking hysterically in the car, spinning. That is ridiculous. That is movement, but it's useless. Why is the dog doing that? How does that benefit the dog as a working dog? Now compare that to a dog that just rests quietly in the car until you need it. You'll have way more to work with if the dog doesn't wear itself out. Plus, you're not irritating the entire neighborhood, but that's another thing. Drive does not have to be movement, and it actually does start to bleed over into anxiety. So when you have dogs that move, not because they're in drive requires a focal point. That's how I tell people you can tell the difference. So if a dog comes into a space and is moving, and then everybody's, oh, I love that dog, has so much drive. Well, the dog has a lot of movement. So does the dog have drive? Well, here's how you can tell. Ask yourself as you watch that dog moving, why is the dog moving? If you can't answer that question, what you have is movement, not drive. So if you say to me, oh, he's moving because there is a ball on a shelf and he sees it and he's trying to get to it, I will agree with you. That is drive, because there's a focal point. If you say, oh, he always does that when he gets into a new space, that's not drive. That's movement. Well, is it anxiety? Okay, how about, well, he always does that when he comes into a new space with dogs he doesn't know. That's anxiety. Is it terrible? Maybe not. I mean, it may just be a dog who has a little anxiety about new dogs, and his response to anxiety is movement. So that brings me to another thing I want to talk about. Average dogs, pet dogs, may move more or they may move less when they're a little bit nervous and anxious, just like people, right? Some people, when they get nervous, they pace. They go, 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 go. And other people just stop moving and get very small and quiet, and they pretend like they don't exist, right? Both are perfectly logical responses to stress. One is stressing up and the other is stressing down. As a general rule, working dogs stress up. They exhibit stress with movement. Not good, not bad, just is. When you stress a working dog, let's say you stress it because you correct the dog and the dog doesn't know what the correction was for. Movement will generally be the result with a working bred dog. So they will get anxious, and as a result of anxiety, they may actually look kind of flashy, and people like that. And then they say, oh no, he likes to be corrected, it brings out his drive. That is a terrible misunderstanding of what's happening. What you're seeing is a dog who is anxious and nervous, and as a result, he starts to move more, and then you start seeing that this kind of stuff. You often hear squeaking. If you're dealing with like a German Shepherd, they squeak. Belgians, you see the mouth come wide open, and you see all the dog's teeth, and they pull back their lips. That's not happy. That's not drive. That's anxiety. But these dogs exhibit anxiety and drive. And then you find that when these dogs understand the correction, if they're well trained, so if you're at the top end, right, the top 1/100th of 1% of the IPO dogs, there's really, really good dogs, you don't actually see some of those behaviors because the dogs understand the corrections because they've been very well trained, and they probably didn't get a lot of corrections, because I think you'll find that as you talk to people, most people find themselves using many fewer corrections as they become more sophisticated because they don't need them anymore. People who are using corrections all the time generally aren't very good trainers. So this isn't a matter of being a positive reinforcement trainer or not. It's just that your use of your choices is often a reflection of your capacity. So I know that I am a crossover trainer. I've used many a correction. And I can say that as I became a better crossover trainer, I used fewer corrections because I was better at communicating what I wanted. So this isn't really a function of how you train. It's just a reality that your dog gets trained more quickly and will understand what you want more quickly. So movement is not drive. That's one thing I want to certainly clarify. Anxiety can result in movement, and that is more likely with a high drive working style dog. Obsessive compulsive disorders are always bad, but obsessive compulsive behaviors may actually serve a working dog population well under certain circumstances. When you breed, there is a lot to be said for recognizing that the ability to calm oneself is hugely valuable. You don't need to breed dogs that are hysterical all the time. In a working herding dog situation, you would not find farmers being very enthusiastic about dogs that could not settle. So dogs that spin constantly in their crates would probably not get bred. They may not even survive, actually, because they wouldn't tolerate that. They have no need for that. It is a misunderstanding that has worked its way into the dog sports performance or working dog world that movement is a benefit. Movement is not a benefit unless there's a reason for it. I prefer dogs that can settle. And right now, for the most part, my dogs are pretty calm in my house. And just for the record, all of my dogs have always lived in my house. I've never had a kennel. I've never had dogs outside. So they do live in the house. And I can look back and I can see that one of my dogs had anxiety, and I thought it was drive. She actually had both. She was very high drive, very high anxiety. And I made a lot of mistakes and could have done a much better job with her if I had recognized both and separated them and addressed them individually and taught her to be calm. I think I could have. I just didn't. What else? Movement. I think I covered the things I wanted to talk about. The one thing I think I'd really like to leave with you, if you breed or buy or work with high drive dogs, don't let the dog's quality allow you to take advantage of them, right? So if you're unable to communicate to a very bright dog, and these are very bright dogs, very quickly what you want, it's on you, not on the dog. So the solution is not to come down on the dog or add more punishments. It's to stop and ask yourself why the dog isn't doing what you want. Because if you're holding a ball and your dog lives for that ball and you say sit and the dog doesn't sit, there's a reason. There has to be a reason, because the dog wants the ball more than anything. So if they're completely locked up, and what I mean by that is when the dog wants the thing so much they can't hear you, they can't function, that's a training problem. It's your responsibility to figure out how to allow the dog to calm down enough to be able to hear you. So getting the dog more and more jacked up is not the answer. That's irresponsible. Does it work eventually? Yeah, maybe, because these dogs make up the difference for you, but that doesn't mean it's right, and it doesn't mean you should do it. It also is a slower route. So figuring out how to allow the dog's brain to engage when he's excited, that's a training issue. You can teach that. And you should teach that, because you'll be more successful. So the fact that you were successful without teaching it doesn't mean you did the right thing. It meant you had a good dog. And often working dogs are excellent, excellent dogs. In terms of breeding, anytime your dog shows extreme behaviors and that makes it difficult to train, I want you to really think about your choices in breeding. I'm not saying you should or shouldn't breed the dog. I'm saying breeding for extremes might be kind of exciting, right? Oh my God, look at that dog. He bites and he bites and he bites. So that's nice, but he has to let go, you know? If the dog doesn't let go, you didn't pass. People breed that dog. Oh my God, he's so amazing. Some dogs, when they're biting, when I watch them, it's almost like the dog is mentally gone. If you look at their face, and people are doing everything to try to get the dog off the sleeve, and people think that's great. You know, my God, that dog is so tough. Well, that's nice. The problem is you're sort of torturing the dog. You know, he can't hear you, and you can't get him off. So you've got probably a lot going on there. You probably have a dog that's maybe wired not completely right, and maybe your training didn't do the dog any favors, you know, whipping the dogs up. I don't know why people do that. If you have to whip up a Malinois, it's not suited to the sport. That's just the reality. You should be balancing the dog. You should be balancing the dog's forward drive with stop, control. You need both. And you should be doing that from 8 weeks of age, not when they're 1 year of age and out of their minds and they're completely out of control. And now you're going to get control because you sort of set yourself up, and the dog's going to pay the price. So that's kind of not kind, at the least. So that's what I wanted to say. I'm going to look back through your questions and see if you have any questions you want me to address. You're welcome to put them in the chat box.